Hello, hello, and welcome to the DC Rock History Podcast. My name is Fizz, and you are in for a treat today. We have a professional podcaster, not talking about myself, not talking about Alex, though of course we are both here. I am talking about Eduardo Nunes of Discologist, a wonderful music podcast that is always at the top of my podcast feed. First thing I download and listen to. He's joining us today to talk about The Fallen Angels and their album, It's a Long Way Down. This album is awesome, it's weird, it's wacky, it's unexpected, it rocks, and I'll say it, it's underrated. So this was a real treat to get into. But I do also want to say, if you haven't yet, make sure to follow us and give us a rating on your podcast app of choice. It really does make a big difference. And one more note, we're going to add the DC Rock History block at the top of the intro every time now. I was told that it was inviting and it made people feel like there wasn't any gatekeeping. There was no barrier to entry for the podcast. So we're going to do a little history block at the top. I'm going to keep it short like I did last time and like I will in the future. So yeah, we're going to add that permanently so that everyone feels like they've got the background, a little information on the band or the artist before we jump into the episode overall. So anyways, today we're talking about the Fallen Angels. Let's get into it.
Flex your head. It's time for some hardcore history.
Formed in Washington, D.C. in the mid-60s, the Fallen Angels were a powerhouse of psychedelic rock and an essential part of the city's music scene. Led by Jack Bryant on vocals and bass, with Wally Cook on guitar and Richard Coomer on drums, the band developed a distinct sound that blended British invasion influences with American psychedelia. They quickly became a staple in Georgetown's clubs, performing alongside and sometimes rivaling other local favorites, the Jerry People. The band's journey throughout the late 60s took them from popular Georgetown venues like the Frog and the Keg to the underground scene where they headlined shows at the iconic Ambassador Theater. In 1967, they caught the attention of Roulette Records, who released their self-titled debut album, followed by It's a Long Way Down in 1968. Though their records didn't gain major commercial success, they cultivated a cult following and left a lasting mark with their intense live performances and boundary-pushing sound. While the Fallen Angels disbanded in 1969, their legacy endures as one of DC's most unique psychedelic voices. They remain a testament to the city's vibrant music history and countercultural energy of the 60s. Hello, hello, and welcome to the DC Rock History Podcast. We are talking today about the Fallen Angels and their 1968 album, It's a Long Way Down. But it's a long way up for us here on this podcast because we've got some good old rock and roll to talk about. Before we get too far into the album and the scene at large, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Philip Basnight. I am a local rock and roller. My co-host, Alex, you want to say a few words?
Hi, my name is Alex, and I host a radio show called Stagecraft, and I'm just excited to be here. My first question just out of the gate, though, is I just need all guarantees that this is not some sort of AI-generated album, because, I will claim ignorance. This is the first I had heard about this album. Thank you for introducing me to it, Philip.
Well, we can't be sure, There's about as much information on this album as I think ChatGPT could produce on its own, so it's really hard to say if this is a psyop or if this is psychedelic rock.
I will just put it into the Mandela effect camp, and we can proceed with the show.
We are thrilled today to have a world-class podcaster on with us, host of the DC/Milwaukee-based music podcast Discologist, Wammies advisory committee member, and local rock enthusiast. Eduardo, welcome to the show. We'll let you say a few things about yourself and maybe how you think you ended up here.
Yeah, thank you. I assume I ended up here because I am of a certain age, and this is a DC rock history podcast. So
Incorrect.
No,
The correct answer is you have a crippling affliction, an addiction to rock and roll, and that's the main qualification for being here.
I need more. Well, so Alex already asked one of my questions, which was sort of like, who came across this record and how did you find it? Because I had the same experience of like listening to this and thinking, man, it's so familiar and it makes so much sense, and yet it's almost as if like it has somehow been retconned into existence. But I'm sure we'll get to that in a second. I'll just say it's really really exciting to be here, and I hope that by the end of this, we'll all be convinced that this album really did happen and that it makes sense in this timeline, and that there's a lineage, there are like children to this album running around somewhere.
And we can only hope. But before we get too much into these fallen angels, I do want to start with an icebreaker, which, for the listener at home, I haven't shared this icebreaker with the other two, so they're getting this fresh. What I want to know is, have you ever impersonated something that you thought was cool, and do you think you pulled it off? I'm asking because it seems pretty clear to me that the fallen angels heard what was happening across the pond and they said, you know what, we want a piece of that, and we're going to get some of that British invasion rock and roll, and we'll talk about their success and its varying levels. But in your own life, do you think you've ever, adopted a style, adopted something that maybe wasn't authentic at first? Maybe it was never authentic, and did you pull it off? Alex, do you want to kick us off?
Man, I guess like in terms of authenticity or not, I mean, I guess I've always felt like the guy at the bar with the fake ID who's like trying not to sweat it. Like that's pretty much like my life, except that you eventually like surround yourself with people that you sort of like semi-trust, and they guide you along for like the rest of the way, and then that's pretty much my life. So yeah, I would say inauthentic for everything across the board. Yes. If that's the question.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, I appreciate the honesty.
I feel like I should set aside the pretending I do most days, where I appear to be a sort of mature, sensible, together adult. Because I think I am pulling that little cover band thing off. No, I think so. Have I? So I'm as an immigrant, you go through different kind of phases when you first come to the U.S. and and like there's a phase of like wanting to be very American, and then there's a phase of like wanting to like pull back from that and sort of reclaim your pre-U.S. identity. There's a bunch of people out there who know me as Ed, rather than Eduardo, and who probably think I'm just like a kid who went to high school in Maryland. So I think I am still pulling it off for some of those people.
Were there any things that Ed carried around that Eduardo does not? Were there any characteristics or
oh man,
or signatures?
Yeah, like Ed was a fucking cocky undergrad who really was not able to appreciate. Oh man, this is like I'm gonna be very real here. Ed was really into like James Joyce and Samuel Beckett and that kind of stuff, and Ed didn't really appreciate that suddenly when he was in college there was like this whole wave of immigrant literature, and some of that is like my own like relationship to being an immigrant, but also this sense of just like, no, literature starts, it follows this canon, and like we're not there yet. And I remember having like strong feelings about reading like When I Was Young and Puerto Rican, which is a lovely book, but at 19, I thought it was really important to let the people in my class know that Samuel Beckett was better than that.
Dubliners all the way.
Yeah, right.
I'll cop to one myself. I love skateboarding, and at the ripe age of 30, I broke my wrist and I had to retire my skateboarding ways. But there's a funny distinction between skateboarding and being a skater, you know? And so like, while I've always enjoyed skateboarding outside my house and like could do a few things, like I wasn't going to make a fool of myself, the moment that I got in a crowd of skateboarders, like it was very clear that I was not living the lifestyle that they were living. I was not like truly out there. Any whiff of like, what if we like hopped the fence and like, you know, skated at the middle school, I would be like, well guys, I don't know about that. I think that might be trouble. That'd be trespassing. And you know, just any drugs, anything like that, I was just immediately caught red-handed. And my biggest crime was I just wanted people to skateboard with, but it ended up being a very lonely endeavor for me.
Did you have kids who were like much younger than you too, like showing you up on?
Yeah. And there was this one homeschooled kid who just skateboarded all day, every day. And that was the first time that I realized, you know what, the hours he's putting in, I'm never gonna get there. He's got the time, he's got the flexibility. I cannot convince my parents to let me be homeschooled so I can skateboard all day. But yet somehow he was able to keep up with the skaters, because you could bridge that gap if you were good enough. You know, if the talent level was at a certain point, but I was not delivering the tricks on a level that was going to keep me in the in crowd, despite my squeamishness.
Poor old man, right?
Yeah.
That reminds me of when my stepbrother tried to become like a ranked table tennis player.
Wow.
And I was like, how's it going? And he was in his like late teens, early 20s. And he was like, it sucks having your ass beat by like 11-year-olds every weekend. You know, you win your first matchup, you think you're doing great. And then you just get like,
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, God bless him for trying, you know, we love it. We love to see it. Eduardo, tell us more about your experience in the DC music scene. How do you see yourself fitting into that puzzle? How did you become, for example, a Wammies advisory committee member?
Well, I think I have Chris Naum to thank for that. And I really do. I mean, that's not like a backhanded thanks. That really is like, it's been really fun to work with the folks at the musicianship and be part of the Wammies like judging and selection process. That's actually kind of a really, you know, I've been thinking about this a lot, and that's it's a great question, because I remember seeing Chris Naum at the first time I went to the Wammies a couple of years ago. And he and I had this moment of saying, you know, you think you know the DC music scene. You think you're sort of like, because we're used to going to shows and we know the people at those shows, and it's, you know, everyone is sort of self-contained within the scene. And then you go to the Wammies and you realize like just how much bigger everything is than the little niche segment that even if you think you're someone who like tries to cross-pollinate and goes to like lots of different shows, you end up a little bit kind of segmented off. And when you pull everyone together, I mean, I think what I really like about being involved with that and the event in particular is that it's really a sort of community thing. And I think, you know, DC as a city has a reputation as being a place where you don't have a lot of friends. And I think outside of like, you know, sort of political hill DC, in the artistic community, I think it's always been like very much the opposite of that. I think it's always been very much a series of scenes where musicians, creators, artists approach things as, you know, not as zero sum, but rather as things where, you know, the better the scene is, the better we all do. And so, you know, when my family moved here, I was 14. And once I made some American friends, I learned that you could just hop on the metro from Maryland and go see, you could go to shows at St. Stephen's, that there were all these like all ages things, which were hard to come by in the suburbs. But once you started going to shows, there were suddenly lots and lots of options there. And, I feel like I kind of went through that initial sort of, punk metal, hardcore kind of phase. I came to appreciate DC's bluegrass scene. I was an intern at Smithsonian Folkways, and half the people who work there like were either in the Seldom scene or in Lynn Morris's band or something like that. And so suddenly I felt really kind of plugged into this great folk scene in DC, which was kind of invisible to me as someone who went to primarily kind of rock punk shows. But then suddenly it's like, your banjo teacher plays at Madam's Organ every Wednesday night, and when you start to tap into that, you find that the city has this like very, very rich history of kind of folk forms going back to the country gentleman and all that. I mean, there was a time when WAMU played 3 hours of bluegrass every day from 3 to 6. You only got the news after 6 p.m. because it was drive time bluegrass. And I remember Joe from Joe's Record Paradise, rest in power. He just passed away. Had a checkup of his like annual pledge to WMU, and it was crossed out. And he had written over it something like, no bluegrass, no money from Joe, or something like that, which which is pretty righteous. But yeah, so I feel like I've had a chance to be, here. I've been here for a long time, and so I feel like I've been really lucky to get to experience a lot of different iterations in the city's history. And as someone who loves music, I've mostly experienced it through that. So, I no longer call the 930 Club the new 930 Club, but I probably did until like 5 years ago.
Wow. That's very interesting. On our first episode, we talked about Bo Diddley and how he ended up in DC. And a lot of the reason that he stayed for a while was he found that it was a good gateway. He could go north, he could go south very easily. And because of just the weird way that the weird and tragic way that the finances worked out for him, he had to tour quite hard to make his money. And so bluegrass, I think, bluegrass in DC also makes a lot of sense in that context, because it's really where the North and the South meet. And it's like, it is that dividing line, and it is sort of a funny, it matches the East Coast sensibility in both directions, bluegrass. And I'm sure that's music you could find all over America, of course, but it's always made a lot of sense to me that it would kind of exist as like the bluegrass capital really in the 20th century was Washington, D.C. There's a great interview with Richard Harrington a few years after he left the Washington Post. He was interviewed by the Washingtonian magazine, and the interviewer does a great job, but you could tell Richard Harrington is sort of like, I just can't believe like everybody knows 80s hardcore, but don't you know that there was also all these great guitar players in DC, and don't you know that there was this amazing bluegrass scene in DC, and Richard, we hear you. That's what we're here to sort of drudge up again. And to that point, it's interesting to think about where the world in which the Fallen Angels, today's band, came into existence. This was the mid 60s, and let's think about major things that have happened over the last couple of years in the world of music. The Beatles play on Ed Sullivan in 1964, and
a few days after they played in DC for the first time. We should note.
Yeah. They played the DC Coliseum, I think 2 days later, on that world tour. And it seems like it's impossible to know, really, but it really seems like not only did the Beatles invite that sort of music and the fashion into like the American lifestyle, but they also seem to have invited or opened the floodgates for American youth, specifically white American youth, to feel comfortable starting a band, or even more so, like compelled to. Like it seems like so many bands sprung up at that time, and it was a sort of a permission of like, this is where culture is now, and this is what's happening, and this is what you want to do. This is what you ought to be doing with your life. You should be, making music and expressing yourself, and all that ties in. And it's funny, like I think when we think of the 60s, we really think of the last half of the 60s, and that's the world that the Fallen Angels are being born into. We're looking at Jack Bryant on vocals and bass, Wally Cook on guitar, and Richard Coomer on drums. But one thing that I do think is very interesting, and I'll pull it up here, is if we look at what happened, the top of the charts in the year before this album was made and the year that this album was made. I used to work at a place where it was a radio station. I worked at a radio station, and part of my job was accounting and making sure everyone got paid, and we would replay oldies. And it was interesting when I worked there, I realized how different the perception of what was popular in certain times versus the reality of what was popular in certain times, how big that gap is. It's things that have lasted, things that have endured, like the Beatles. They get remastered and reissued to us, and obviously they were huge. But maybe the Doors is a better example of someone who we think of as an enormous band. But I don't know. It's interesting that they were in 1967 number 6 on the top 100 singles of the year. Ahead of them was "To Sir with Love" by Lulu, "The Letter" by the Box Tops, shout out to Alex Chilton, "Ode to Billy Joe" by Bobby Gentry, "Windy" by The Association, and coming in at number 5 is "I'm a Believer" by the Monkees. And then if we look at 1968, we've got "Hey Jude" by the Beatles, "Love is Blue" by Paul Muriat. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I apologize. "Honey" by Bobby Goldsboro, "Sitting on the Dock of the Bay" by Otis Redding, and "People Gotta Be Free" by the Rascals. So, gents, what does this make you think of? This, to me, it paints a clear picture that we have sort of misremembered certain aspects of what was popular in the 60s.
Yeah, I think it's notable that you have to go, looking at the like 67 singles, you have to go pretty far down to find anyone who would have been associated with like the Summer of Love, which is what I think of when I think of the year 1967, is that, at least from, because I didn't experience it either, but from everything I've read, it sure seems like everyone was in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Eating acid and making incredible music. And you need to go, you need to go a while before you find like a Jefferson Airplane or something on that list. So it leaves me thinking a little bit about how these movements that we give a lot of weight to, and these cultural moments, just how difficult they were to kind of register on the monoculture seismograph or whatever, right? They really just don't show up. And then in 68, which, we were just saying that 68 was probably one of the most turbulent years in America in the 20th century. You wouldn't know it from looking at the charts. It looks like people were having a really nice time and listening to some good music. There's some Herb Alpert on there. You've got, Mrs. Robinson. It's a while before you get to, and there's Sly and the Family Stone and is like number 20, but it's dance to the music. It's not there's a riot going on, Sly.
Yeah. It's also kind of funny that I think, like you were saying, like we would think of it as Summer of Love and very like, San Francisco is just satelliting this, they're just sending this transmission to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. But really it is like, it's like a mix, and there's stuff that would have appealed to youth culture, and there's stuff that would have appealed to like an older demographic. And I think sometimes we think of like, oh, in the Spotify era, everything's so chaotic, and it's never been so chaotic. And I think like a quick glance goes, you know what? Yeah, it has. It actually has been this chaotic before, and you can kind of see that it's never been so. Well, maybe the monoculture has had its heyday, more so than it does right now. There's always been a wide mix of things, but that said, the Fallen Angels, they did sort of tap into this psychedelic um, zeitgeist that was happening, and there were a lot of other interesting characters that were bopping around DC. Emmylou Harris, while she didn't record anything in DC, she did attend high school in the area and went to local clubs. John Fahey's a great folk guitarist, and was active around this time, as well as Roy Buchanan, who went on to play in a bunch of other DC bands. There are certain characters, Punky Johnson among them, who they show up a lot in this era. Seems like maybe, I don't know, not unlike today, but there were, a couple bass players who made the rounds and really kind of like got to be in all the local groups and stuff. So it's kind of fun to think about all that. And on a previous episode, we've talked about the Cherry People, and they were the first DC band to have a top 50 Billboard hit with "And Suddenly," which was a cover, but it still probably invigorated the area. To tie it to more recent things, I remember when the band Shade had that song "Trampoline" that was, it might have gone, I don't know where it peaked, but I mean, it was a big hit. It was in a big Apple campaign. And that definitely gave a big jolt to this area, especially in terms of people thinking for the first time, oh, DC can actually produce pop music. We have not been allowed to produce pop music in this area prior to, at least on a successful global scale prior to this, basically. So that was kind of cool. And just, people being able to see themselves, see people like them and people around them succeed. It does open doorways. So even though the Fallen Angels and the Cherry People started right around the same time, it's hard to tell which one started first. I bet that it was invigorating for them to kind of get that, attention on the city.
It's also interesting too, like thinking about this time frame, and going, stretching out, a little before and a little after. You have, I mean, some of my favorite live recordings were from DC in this area, not by DC musicians, but in what I always thought was sort of an interesting, so it's Ramsey Lewis's "The In Crowd" was recorded at Bohemian Caverns, and like 70, I think Miles records "Live Evil" at the Cellar Door. There's a Richie Havens live at the Cellar Door too. I mean, these were all really, really kind of important, commercially successful figures who made those, who chose to make DC, the DC audience, the sort of background for those recordings. Oh, and Little Feat's "Waiting for Columbus" was at the Patriot Center. That's like 1972. So that's only 4 years out from where we are. So I think when I think about kind of what the DC scene would have been like at the time, I think it's a scene that is full of, sort of knowledgeable, passionate, and fans at a number large enough that touring acts are deciding to record sort of marquee albums in front of a DC crowd.
Totally. Another one that it wasn't immediately released, but Marvin Gaye did a live version of "What's Going On" at the Kennedy Center in 1972. So just right after this, and he's an interesting case of, like Duke Ellington before him, where cut his teeth in the DC area, was in the New Moon Glows, I believe, and the Marquis, and then joined the Navy, left the area, and never came back. And, obviously went on to become the greatest of all time. but always kept DC in his heart. I guess another modern version of this would be Dave Grohl. Anytime a venue or a hot dog stand or anything opens in DC, a shoe store opens. If you want to sell New Balance, you got to have Dave Grohl at your ribbon cutting. But to his credit, he shows up, and so I do have an affection for Duke Ellington, Marvin Gaye, Dave Grohl, these characters who keep coming back to sort of pump a little bit of life into the local scene, even though it's not a town that has ever, I don't think, ever been considered to have like, oh, maybe Warner Records should set up a satellite office here so that they can, use the local talent. I don't think we've ever gotten that far, but at the same time, there is sort of like always an undercurrent of people who leave, come back, and all that. To what you were saying, also, I thought it'd be kind of interesting to look at the venues that were running in DC. We have the Howard Theater, the Cellar Door in Georgetown, the Showboat Lounge on K Street. Coltrane, Miles Davis played there. The Bayou, which is a famous club in Georgetown. It was revamped. I'm told that I played at the new Bayou, and I don't think it had quite the same charm and history as the old one. Bohemian Caverns, which seems to come and go on it seems like they're on an upswing again. The Maryland Club, where Marvin Gaye also played, and the Child Herald in DuPont Circle. So kind of fun to think about the venues that were around back in that time, and which ones have sort of continued to be iconic. Everybody knows the Howard Theater. You still hear about the Cellar Door and the Bayou, and Bohemian Caverns is a name that is continuing to operate. So it's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
There's an interesting thing too about how you had these, especially in the kind of folk roots Americana, whatever you want to call it, space. You have like Elizabeth Cotten, who was recorded by Mike Seeger in the 50s, and who's wrote a number of really important folk songs that like spawn entire wings of like the Americana DNA tree or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi John Hurt lived in DC for like 10 years in Adams Morgan or something. He was like discovered still alive.
I didn't know that.
It was like, right. So like he lived in Adams Morgan in like the 60s maybe.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things about the DC scene is how it's always really been based on this duality of like, you've got a day job and you're a gigging musician at night, and that's sort of how you play locally. And that's, I think, so for example, bluegrass, which we were talking about, a big part of the culture there is you have white folk from the South who are moving to the city for a job, and they're working that job during the day, but they're sort of keeping their roots and their traditions and playing bluegrass at night. And I think that, I'm tempted to think that a little bit of the way the Fallen Angels approached this, which is that, as not to offer up any spoilers, but they're gonna sort of do things their own way and end up paying a little bit of a commercial penalty for that. And It seems a little bit like maybe they could do that because maybe this was never meant to be their full-time thing anyway. Maybe this was just always something where they got lucky, or it was something that was fun. And when it ran out, they just went back to whatever they did before then.
Well, did you all see the Wikipedia entry about them being on the Upbeat, the Cleveland-based American Bandstand ripoff show?
Yes. Yeah. I did see that. It's fantastic.
Tell us more about what that says, Alex.
So just to read it directly from the Wikipedia. So I guess when the Fallen Angels were scheduled to appear on Upbeat, a Cleveland-based adaptation of American Bandstand, to promote the single Hello Girl, the record label rearranged the song to be more commercially appealing without the band's consent, consequently leading the group to retaliate by ripping a doll's head off during filming. As a result, the performance was heavily edited for the broadcasting. I did try to look up something on YouTube quickly, and it wasn't available that I could see.
There is a spirit in this time that reminds me very much of like viral marketing now, or I don't even know if marketing is what you'd say, but like you all may have seen that video that goes around social media of the mamas and the papas. They're outraged that they have to sing, and so one of the members is like licking a lollipop throughout her whole
I think it's
set.
eating a banana.
Eating a banana, thank you. Yeah, and in protest, and it's like, I feel like there's something about that Gen Z really feels that same sort of like indignance, like, or I'm just going to go on your show just to kind of mess it up. I feel like there's some kindred spirits in what we see from like young pop stars today. But no, that's pretty funny. I love that they ripped a doll head off. I'm sure that in the 60s that was seen as wildly offensive. Kidding, mostly. All right. This album, let's get into the brass tacks of how it was made, and then what do you guys think? Maybe we'll give it a listen. I love it. It was recorded at Regent Sound Studio in New York City. Production was led by Tom Wilson, who also worked with Bob Dylan and the Velvet Underground. Now, Eduardo, like you were saying, like maybe they took things into their own hands with this recording. I will say that, like it or not, this album has much more character than their debut. And it does seem like, from what I've seen online and the kind of prominence on Light in the Attic, who did a reissue of both of these albums, this seems to be the one that has had the longer life. They took bigger swings, and maybe they were trying to be like the Velvet Underground. Maybe they were just trying to be like themselves. Who knows? But it did definitely seem to create more of an impact. So
I think that, I mean, in addition to it not being their debut, right? So when you're, I'm projecting a little bit here, but let's assume that on the first album, they're if it's a jump ball, it goes to the label guy, right? Or the studio gets to make the call, and it sounds like they were able to, maybe partly through stunts like ripping the head off the doll, we're able to like assume a little bit more creative control over what they were doing. This album does, I mean, it does sound like, it does feel like there is a vision that is being, like a concrete specific vision that is being realized, right? As opposed to just, oh, we have like, 4 good songs and we're just gonna figure out how to turn that into an album, which, is sort of like the default mode for record making for like most of recorded history. Here it did seem like there was sort of a cohesive, unified vision. And at least all of the like ancillary material about it that you can find online, which again, to Alex's point, like it's not like there's a lot of this out there, but you do see this sense that like they were more creatively in control on this album than they were on the first one. And I agree with you. It does have a lot more, it's much more interesting than the debut. It has a lot more character. It's interesting to me that this album, I'm not sure that it's on the whole, quote unquote, weirder than the first one. But that's probably just because it doesn't sound as strange to our ears today. And also because it's really like sort of, it's like unified, right? There's like a consistent kind of aesthetic that I think permeates it, that makes it feel like a complete, package, a complete unit.
I agree. Well, on that note, let's get into that package. This is the first cut off of the Fallen Angels 1968 album. It's a long way down. It's called Poor Old Man.
just couldn't care less about hostile vibrations coming from the kitty's nest. Old man, I think you're wrong. You're a little scared of something you're not prepared to fight. It won't be so kind when you discover that it's in your mind. You'll see the child was right. Love's just a big white light. Oh.
All right, gents, what do we think? Poor old man.
Hostile vibrations, huh?
This is the sort of song, this is the sort of album that I enjoyed diving into this immensely. And when my wife was in the car and I put this on for her, I became very aware of how much I had been enjoying this song or these songs, and that's the Britishness of it that I think is so surprising. Like the lyrics that you would expect from Led Zeppelin or from I've been trying to think of maybe those first shucks, like Genesis records or something, like very like flowery British language. If you told me this was a British band, I wouldn't think twice. But to hear this from an American band in the 60s, it's like a little striking, right? It's a little out of the ordinary.
The song has a really weird progression too. Like it has a sort of quiet, slow, almost falling apart middle section.
Yeah.
Before it comes back for the last like minute or so, which is just a sort of, I mean, that's your album opener. That's like, side one.
Yeah, it almost had like, I didn't get it until I saw it in the notes. It definitely had sort of like that art rock, sort of Velvet Underground vibe in its own way, which was, it's not necessarily psychedelic. It's almost like, art rock. It was cool. I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it is almost more art rock than the band might tell you, and their album art might tell you we're a psychedelic band, but then the music sort of gives you something else. That's helpful, Alex, because it is like there's something about the way the whole thing's packaged versus the actual experience. And I really could believe they went in and they said, we want to be the Velvet Underground does Sgt. Pepper, right? Because there's the audience cheering halfway through. And this is, a year after Sgt. Pepper. And that would have been an example of like something being artistic and critically acclaimed while also being hugely commercially successful. And you can sort of feel a foot in both of those worlds a little bit. I don't know that they're going for commercial success. They're kind of just doing what they want to do, but I don't know. There do seem to be like a lot of different influences coming in.
Well, the sort of generational, the notes here, right, seem plainly. I mean, it's they could be talking about the people who run Warner. They could be talking about the people who are running the country at that point. I mean, I think it's a nice. I think just as an opening statement of a young band trying to connect with young folks, I think it's a really it's sort of less it's not quite, it's not a paint it black, but it's a like, we are painting over something. we're painting something some other color, not the color you intended, old man.
A nice battleship gray, perhaps. So there's a comment on the all music boards that I'll reserve for after you play the next track that I think is, I don't know if it's you all can be the judge if it's insightful or not. It's not insulting at all. It's an observation of style.
I love it. Let's hear that next track, a horn playing on my thin wall, and then we'll comment on that comment.
You asked me to think about my leaving you far behind, my leaving you far behind, and my leaving you far behind. At nights when I think of your wish, of this I admit that I've cried. Of this I admit that I've cried. Over it I admit that I've cried. And then in my ears I would hear a horn playing on my thin wall, a horn playing on my thin wall, your horn playing through my thin wall.
All right, Alex, what do the good folks at All Music say?
So this is a comment from, I will leave out the last name, but a gentleman by the name of Tim says, would Bell and Sebastian exist without this record? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I submit into evidence track 2, a horn playing through my thin walls. The prosecution rests.
I can't believe it. I didn't put it in the show notes because I didn't want to tip off my amazing comment that I was going to come in with, which was how much this sounds like Bell and Sebastian, from the lyrics to the singing. I can't believe it. Tim, you and I were cosmically aligned. This is, I mean, I don't know, Boy with an Arab Strap. Mm-hmm. If you're feeling sinister, maybe. That era of Bell and Sebastian, it's sparse, it's melancholy. Yeah.
And you can definitely hear the sort of, you can certainly hear where Stuart Murdoch as a singer was influenced by, maybe, perhaps, I mean, we don't know if it was directly by this or not, but certainly, it is very, very evocative of early Bell and Sebastian, and that's kind of appropriate because the song seems to, this is like a little bit of a turn to the personal here, right? With sort of like echoes of some unresolved relationship or person sounding like an instrument being played next door. I think it's a nice little stirring, evocative image.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's great. And I totally, again, I'm sort of keep coming back to this, but of this, I admit that I've cried. Very British, very, of the UK. So it's sort of one of those situations like the Strokes claim that they never heard television before they made their record. But, we'll never know. We'll never know if Stuart ever heard The Fallen Angels, but somehow he landed on this, he landed on the family tree nonetheless. He's got Fallen Angels He carried the torch. I love it. All right. Well, the last one that I wanted to listen to is Something New You Can't Hide Behind. Here on the DC Rock History Podcast, of course, we don't listen to all the tracks. We just listen to key tracks. We're sifting through for you, the listener at home, and we want you to go out there and give these albums a listen. So we'll just listen to maybe 3 more. I've got one last one, and then guys, if you want to cue one up after that, after Something New You Can't Hide In, that'd be rad. Here we go. Here's what I'll say about the Fallen Angels. No disrespect to the albums that we've checked out before this. Bo Diddley certainly rocked in his own way. The Cherry People grooved, but this is the first like real rocking moment that we get on a like recorded studio album from Washington D.C. That's my take. Is that this is the first time that we're in the modern sense of rocking. This is the first time we're rocking. You know. I don't know if it is the height of is this the high point of DC rock and roll? I don't know, but it's our first peak. It's our first attempt at really like kicking out the jams.
And it starts with what feels like kind of like a fake out, like a sort of like Fairport Convention type fake out before it sort of slyly becomes this much bigger rocker. This is where the one of the labels, I know that genres and labels are that there's sort of diminishing returns to talking about them sometimes, but I keep seeing people describing them as kind of garage rocky. And at least for me, one of the defining elements of garage rock is that there's like a really loud, incorrectly mic'd hi-hat somewhere or something. There's just there's like one instrument that is sort of
where
like
the drums are in mono. And,
yeah. And every time I've listened to this album, I've just come away thinking like, wow, this is also technically a very well recorded album for the time, even where you have songs that where you can tell there's a sort of a guitar solo, like an electric guitar solo that's kind of that's a separate take. It doesn't sound sometimes during this time period, you would hear recordings and you could clearly tell that there was a sort of like, it's like being able to see the like film, cut. And I don't get that from this album at all. And I think that track is just a great example of like a band that can sort of go from soft and quiet to kind of bigger and loud, and sounds like it's sort of one take. And it's just I think mixed very well. It sounds really good. I don't really get why they keep getting called garage rock, but maybe that's because I don't understand garage rock.
It's an interesting like all the albums that we've listened to, you have to really think about what was available to record, and then just realize how good these bands were compared to, like, getting a cohesive sound like this these days can be faked. And it's not, you just can't back then. And there is a liveliness to like, the way that they seem to like switching between tempos and, really sort of going all out and then pulling it way back. And that's the kind of stuff that, being a band who they could only exist by playing with one another, which sounds so obvious, but in the modern context, that's really not what a band is. Bands are people who collaborate on music, often from very far away in a digital way, but like, you can really hear you can just imagine the fallen angels getting in the room together and being like, and then it needs to get, really wild. And maybe, Richard Coomer on the drums is like, and then I'm going to do this. And everybody's like, yeah, do that. And, it's great. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. So, let's get two more in there. Do each of you want to maybe choose a track and we'll.
Well, I do like the title track. I think the other
Love
two
it.
songs that I would pick out here are probably either the title track or Look at the Wind. I think those are both sort of more upbeat, and maybe actually there's an implicit question there for you two, which is how do you all feel about the sort of shorter, more sort of vignette type songs? Because there's a few of those in here that are sort of under 2 minutes and just seem like a sort of little pastoral element, a little, sort of different touch. I've found that those really didn't really seem to have a lot of staying power for me, but I'm curious how they sounded to you.
I agree. They don't have as much staying power. They do propel you into the next track nicely. And for those who haven't listened to the album, they're just shorter, more stripped back for the most part tracks. It had a pre-DIY quality that people always say, like, oh, Nebraska, or then a few years ago it became very cool to say Ram.
Yeah.
These are the forebearers of indie DIY. I was like, I don't know, maybe the Fallen Angels were seems like somebody got in the studio and was just like, hit record, I'm doing what I want, and nobody really said this isn't fully fleshed out, or this is it. It seems very intentional, in a way that you could fast forward to an Alex G, or maybe even a Blonde, the outros of some of those, Nights by Frank Ocean. You have these intentionally sparse and individual slices that it's almost as if someone is scrolling through the radio dial, right? And I hear that here, and I'm hard pressed to think of actually I can think of one, a quick one while he's away would be another example of that. So it happens, but it's an interesting, whether it was intentional or not, it does sort of propel the album forward for me. Alex, did you have any thoughts on those shorter
Yeah,
songs?
I mean, I wanted to click back into what you said in terms of like the rocking, and I think that, definitely there was like sort of like a shredding aspect to that solo. It almost had like a Mars Volta-esque quality. And when you said the thing about like the in-between tracks, like you could almost hear like, Mars Volta using that as like some sort of like in-between track, like over distorted or whatever. But, I enjoyed, it as an album from top to bottom. Like I listened to it twice front to back. And so I had no concept at all of like the actual breaks, as they pertain to like songs versus not, and so like I didn't really even get to like hear it from that perspective, but it never felt disjointed or strangely out of place. Never once did I like the tell for me is like, did I actually like, disturb the mouse so I could see like, wait, what song is it? How many more are there left? Never once did I, and listening to it twice.
I love it. You know what? Let me leapfrog you, Eduardo, as you are our guest. We'll go out on your recommendation with the title track. But Alex, do you have another track besides the title track, It's a Long Way Down, that you'd like to?
You don't have to play the
check
one
out?
that I had, but for me, the one that I went back to and was, I guess, the only one I wanted to see the name of because I wanted to call it out, was one of the few ones left I thought was really splendid.
I love it. Let's hear a little bit of that.
The world of dreams tonight is mine. The things I've wanted all I had, I wish them here. I could have stepped on dreams and roads no one would have known. Someone had called. I loved it when you ran. It would have said I am one of the few ones left inside. I left a crowd to hold your hand, knowing all I knew, and not have turned. I could have stepped on dreams and roads.
It's a lovely song. Oh, and it continues.
It gave me like that band Spiritualized.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it gave me that kind of vibe.
I could really see that with just slightly more intentional lo-fi production being on an MGMT album, like a modern MGMT album, like with a little bit more auto-tune and reverb and delay, and like, you don't have to change much. That's like, that'd work on, a little Dark Age or whatever. It's interesting. All right. Well, do we have any closing thoughts before we go out on It's a Long Way Down? Any thoughts on? Oh goodness, let's see if I can get this right. And this is going to be the context, unburdened by the context of what has been. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
I apologize to everyone forever. Also, this is gonna probably be released in the fall, and that will make less than no sense. Or, anyways, let me rephrase from the top there. It's interesting to think about DC, and I think this is a great album that embodies this. DC as a microcosm of what's happening musically in America overall, or around the world, but specifically in the US. I think in the 60s, we saw bands that were imitating really famous bands. And in the case of the Cherry People, wow, they even got a top 50 Billboard hit and entered that conversation to some degree. This was on Warner Music. This was part of that conversation, So it's interesting now, knowing what we know, DC is known for fiercely independent music. This exists in a, hey, look at us in DC. We're kind of part of this too. We're kind of doing it, and I really love this record. I will continue to spin this for fun. But I'm not sure if every band from DC had been like the Fallen Angels, I'm not sure that we would be able to do a DC rock history podcast. Or I'm not sure that it would have jumped out at us immediately as, oh, there's real juice here. Yeah, what do you guys think?
I think that's really well put. I mean, I think it's fun to imagine a different timeline where this becomes like a dominant form of local music, and we become known as the sort of the town that launched a million sort of Chad and Jeremys or something like that. Which maybe is not so bad, but I am burdened by what has happened and by what has been, and so I think like you, I said at the top of the show that maybe there are sort of maybe this album has a lineage and there are children running around. Maybe that's not the right measure of success. Of artistic success, certainly. And sometimes these things that feel like dead ends end up being much more interesting. And of course, they're never really dead ends. They're really, I learned about like the Raincoats and the Vaselines from Kurt Cobain. I don't think those bands ever expected that there would be like a globally renowned superstar from Seattle, Washington, who would make the world aware of those bands. But that's exactly what happened. So I think it's really, it's really fun that this exists, and it's a really great little sort of self-contained avenue of the DC music scene that as a partisan for it, I think it makes the city's musical history richer and more interesting. And there's no doubt in my mind that like it makes us better for the fact that it existed.
Hear, hear. Alex, what do you think? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just, I want to shout out, both of y'all for being so deep in the study and so deep in the research into this. It's just a testament to how passionate you are. And we are lucky to get to listen to it. It's just really, it's just heartening to know that there are people who are so into it that they're willing to put in the time to share this with us. So thank you for sharing this album. Thank you for sharing your insights. It's wonderful that you exist in this world. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's nice.
Nice. Yeah.
We are again looking at maybe a fall release. But do we have anything we want to plug here at the end? As is the podcast way.
Yeah, what are we all going to be standing in the fall, huh?
I can't believe you guys aren't listening to Fill in the Blank.
Oh yeah, no, I've been on those guys ever since.
Oh, good. Okay, well, definitely check out Discologist. It's a great podcast.
Yeah, sometimes you'll hear Philip on there too.
You know what? Ever since I sank into the background and became a listener first, I've enjoyed it so much more because I don't have to worry about my dumb comments popping up. But for real, Discologist with Eduardo and Kevin is one of my weekly listens. It's always at the top of my feed. They're doing great work over there. And if you haven't checked it out before, you have tons of episodes to go back and explore.
Very kind.
Oh, I mean it. I love it.
Yeah, listen to Stagecraft on Mixcloud with me and Don Zantara, where we talk to artists and stuff. Please go to Mixcloud. That's where we are.
Alex is no longer on social media. Stagecraft is no longer on social media, so we're going to have to plug twice as hard, all right? They're doing awesome work over there as well, putting on awesome shows. So tell your friends, check it out. I've been lucky enough to be a part of that as well, and can vouch for both of these fellas. They're doing great work in the DC area. So with that, we're going to go out with It's a Long Way Down. But like I said up top, it's been a long way up. Maybe.
Hey-o.
Hey-o. And yeah, we need a catchphrase to go off on, but until we get one, here we go. Bombs away.
Bombs away. Well done. Well done.
From where I am to where I'm going to. I've changed my life so many times before. I forgot what I've been along.